Ukrainian new nuclear weapons program. Is that even possible? Second topic, Russian frozen assets. I'm in oligarch Abramovich and his promise to sell his Chelsea soccer toy, remember, and give money to Ukraine, and what came out of this promise as of now. In the Blitz interview with Paul Nyland, businessman and journalist, founder of Lifeline Ukraine, we discuss exactly that. Nuclear things and frozen Russian assets, how frozen they are, Trump's U.S. aid suspension, divorce forum results, and etc., etc. Good afternoon. My name is Henry Keane, and we are Creative English, an English-speaking Ukrainian state media in constant persuasion to deliver hard truth in easy terms for the whole free world directly from Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy recently criticized Ukraine's decision to give up its nuclear arsenal in the 90s without receiving strong security guarantees in return. Ukraine relinquished the Soviet-era nuclear arms stationed on its territory under the Budapest Memorandum signed in 1994. The deal saw Kyiv joining the Treaty of the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, NPT, and receive security guarantees from great powers, namely the United States, the United Kingdom, and Russia. Ukraine did exactly that, and guarantees were issued from Russian side just as well. In 20 years, however, from then these security guarantees turned to be not so much security and not at all guarantees. Violating the agreement, Russia takes an act of criminal aggression against Ukraine in 2014, occupying Crimea and parts of eastern Ukraine. And 30 years in, Russia is now actively conducting full-scale criminal offensive against Ukraine.
In my opinion, it should not have been done based on the fact that we were attacked. Therefore, I believe that it was stupid, absolutely stupid and illogical. President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy.
The outbreak of the full-scale invasion sparked discussions again on whether Ukraine should again develop new nuclear weapons as a deterrent against Russian aggression. The Ukrainian leadership denied any such plans and said that NATO membership is the best possible security guarantee. Ukraine has applied to join NATO at the outbreak of the full-scale invasion in 2022, but is yet to receive an official invitation. Despite an allied pledge from last year that Kyiv's path towards membership is irreversible, Zelenskyy pointed to continued resistance to Ukraine's entry from countries like the United States, Germany, Hungary, and Slovakia. As US Donald Trump pushes for negotiations to end the war this year, Russia said that a full ban on Ukraine's NATO accession is one of its key demands for resolving the conflict. Well, sure as hell it is, as it is main Russian propaganda narrative. Oh my God, NATO is getting bigger, it's growing. Well, to debunk this absurd narrative is an easy task. You know who was greatest NATO promoter of all times? Vladimir Putin. No one ever made the alliance grow bigger in two countries, Finland and Sweden, in just a month. And that was exactly the case after the indicted Russian Tsar started his criminal adventure, a war in the heart of Europe. This topic's title would really be a perfect pick for another Harry Potter series. Abramovich, Frozen Assets and the House of Lords. Russian-Israel oligarch Roman Abramovich evaded millions in taxes in EU countries through a fake yacht for hire scheme, according to a joint investigation by the BBC, The Guardian, and the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. And actually, common sense just as well, because frankly, if you would be Abramovich, a Russian oligarch, would you act the same, avoiding taxes when and how you can? Well, I guess it will have to remain a mystery forever, but this is not only you and Abramovich I wanted to talk about. In particular, Russian money, somewhat frozen in the West in general. Let us all talk about that. Back then, the UK's House of Lords issued a report a year ago condemning the incomprehensible, what they call failure of the government to spend frozen funds from Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich's sale of Chelsea Football Club on aid for Ukraine. Abramovich has a net worth estimated to be around 9 billion and has Russian, Israeli and Portuguese citizenship. He was formerly the governor of the Chukotka region in Russia's Far East and previously owned Chelsea Football Club, which he was forced to sell after the outbreak of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The sale of this Chelsea Football Club generated £2.5 billion, which is $3.2 billion, which Abramovich said he would donate to Ukraine. Almost 20 months later, the funds remain in a bank account in the United Kingdom and have yet to be spent on aid for Ukraine. The impasse appears to be related to a disagreement between the UK and Abramovich about how the funds should be spent. It reflects poorly on Mr. Abramovich and the government for failing to enter into more binding agreement, the report said. Let us all remember how it was.
The committee urged the government to use all available legal levers to solve this impasse rapidly so that Ukraine can receive much-needed, promised and long overdue relief. The UK's House of Lords Committee.
Right. Abramovich and other top Russian oligarchs were sanctioned after the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. So Abramovich later filed a challenge against the decision at the EU court in Brussels, stating that he had no influence over the Kremlin's decisions whatsoever and that his business interests were not connected to the war. Abramovich lost this appeal to be removed from the sanctions list in December 2023. Shortly after the outbreak of the full-scale invasion, Abramovich participated in peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. He visited Kiev as part of the talks in April 2022, which his spokesperson denied. Later in the year, Abramovich met with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to help negotiate a prisoner exchange. So the dear House of our Lords a year ago was against the fact that Abramovich somewhat does not want to give up on £3 billion or dollars that he promised to donate to Ukraine, but did not so far do that, as probably he's afraid that Putin will murder him for that. And what the House of Lords is afraid today when it comes to $300 billion of pure Russian assets that are frozen in the West and in the United Kingdom in European and English banks. Don't get me wrong, dear Lords. Accuse Abramovich all you want. It is the right thing to do. But the bare fact is, a war that costs twice as much in money than Russian assets frozen, about $700 billion and counting, added to immeasurable suffering and hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian lives lost amidst Russian-style criminal invasion of Ukraine. And all these 300 billion Russian assets are still there, still in English and European banks. So why don't you go ahead and give Abramovich a fine British example of how it all should be? Alienate Russian oligarchic property. All these castles in Wales where, in 1,000 years history, people are all of a sudden talking Russian now. Take all that, sell it, add 300 billions in Western banks, at least English share of it, and give it all the money to Ukraine. I mean, lead the way, good lords. Maybe Abramovich will follow. Paul Nylands, gentleman, businessman, journalist, founder of Lifeline Ukraine. It is great to have you back with us, Paul. Hello.
It's always a pleasure to be with you, and I look forward to getting into the questions.
First question. Let's talk about nukes, shall we? Zelenskyy said giving up on nukes in 1990s was stupid and illogical. Would you agree to that?
Hindsight is 20/20, isn't it? I mean, we can all look at the invasion, the breach of Ukraine's sovereignty in 2014 in Donbass, in Crimea. We can look at the full-scale invasion, everything that has happened since 2022. You know, yes, the Budapest Memorandum clearly did fail, and so we can criticize that. But Ukraine's decision to give up nuclear weapons, if we look in the grand scheme of things, I actually think was the right thing to do. And I think that nuclear weapons are the worst. I watched Oppenheimer, as have we all. It is the big blockbuster that it is. But for many years, actually, I've strenuously objected to these horrendous weapons that can inflict such horrible, awful damage. And I also don't see. I mean, I think we should live in a world free of nuclear weapons, but I also don't see in this war, in the early phase of the war, where there was a threshold that Ukraine might have responded with nuclear weapons, nor has there been a threshold where Russia has deemed that the use of even a tactical small threshold nuclear weapon on there was never a moment when really that could have been of any benefit. And I don't see that Ukraine acquiring, or in fact anybody else in the world acquiring nuclear weapons really stands against this kind of test that Ukraine has faced. They're different questions. Was the Budapest Memorandum a failure? Yes, it was.
It was.
It was breached by one of the signatories, which is Russia. It was not sufficiently upheld by the others.
Absolutely.
The question about whether Ukraine should have nuclear weapons is a different question.
Well, it is a different question. But if Ukraine would have nuclear weapons right now in stock, do you believe, Mr. Nyland, that it would deter Russian aggression in some portion of it, or maybe in full?
No, because again, we have not in this war, in any part of this war, reached a level where that kind of weapon usage would have been warranted. And so, no, I don't think the nuclear deterrent would have necessarily stopped this very, very analog war. I mean, it's increasingly less analog. It's increasingly more digital and more drone and more, technologically driven. But it is a very traditional kind of warfare at the same time. And no, I don't think nuclear weapons in our possession back at any point,
right,
or in the future, deters this regular Russian aggression, the regular Russian military threat.
So this regular Russian military threat, if I'm reading you correctly, the Ukrainian new nuclear weapon programs is absolutely unnecessary, and it is not an alternative to NATO. Is that right? Is that what you're telling?
I don't believe there is any alternative to NATO for Ukraine. And again, an independent path of, I mean, let's be quite clear about this. Ukraine could technologically develop a nuclear program. It is within Ukraine's capabilities to do so. It is also within Ukraine's sovereign choice, other than, signatories to non-proliferation agreements and so on and so on. It would be Ukraine's choice to do that. I fundamentally disagree with that. I don't think it's a course that Ukraine should take. I don't think it's even a conversation that we should be having. No, the war as it is, or the war that must be fought, is the war as it is. And too many people have been discouraged from fighting the war as it is because of imagining the war that could be, because of discussions about a potential nuclear threat. You know what? The threat of nuclear catastrophe exists because those weapons exist. The threat of one actually being used is an entirely different calculation, and it is minuscule, and people should just get it out of their heads.
Right.
It's not the solution.
I'm reading you again. I agree and disagree, but so I would love to have a conversation. We should maybe grab a coffee and have a 3 hours conversation on that matter. But let us all slide in an easier topic and maybe more even fun, but somewhat fun. Russian frozen assets. Forgive me, assets. Oligarch Abramovich and his promise to sell his Chelsea soccer toy and give money to Ukraine. Well, he didn't do that because he fights Putin, of course, but the House of Good Lords of England, back then, a year ago, if I'm not mistaken, had a committee meeting on that, and let me quote that for you. The UK's House of Lords condemns the incomprehensible failure of the government to spend frozen funds from Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich's sale of Chelsea Football Club on aid for Ukraine. So my question to this regard is, why the House of Lords in Europe and the West, collective West, would not lead the way and unfreeze all the Russian assets in the UK in favor of Ukraine in the first place, like $300 billion there. Why it has not happened before?
Okay, they're two very, very different things, and we're in two completely different legal fields as well here, right? So if we're talking about $300 billion in Russian assets, what we're talking about is Russian central bank assets that have been frozen in various countries around the world. They're sitting in the EU. There's a lot of money in Luxembourg, I believe. There's some money in the United States of America. And that's 300 billion in total. What we're talking about with Abramovich is private assets that are held by a private individual And so, to draw a line between Russian state responsibility
Right.
for the damage to Ukraine
Absolutely.
and their obligation, to use the minimum word, to pay for that damage,
Right.
that's easy. To draw the line from Abramovich's assets to refunding Ukraine or funding Ukraine's reconstruction, that's a different question. However, Abramovich himself did actually pledge to do this.
Yes,
right? So
exactly.
whether the House of Lords intervenes or not because it's a private property issue,
Right.
et cetera,
But
their job, I suppose, is to analyze laws and see how they are applied and applicable. But the Abramovich question, it goes back further than that. I mean, we'll jump back to the
let's
Russian
take it
central
further
bank
than
assets
that.
in a minute, if you want to. But the Abramovich question, right? So, I mean, I just said the job of the Lords is to examine laws and how they're applied and applicable. What was the job of Abramovich when he came to London, when he bought Chelsea? His job was to infiltrate British society, British politics with large S. And in England,
Absolutely.
there is the FA. And the FA actually have guidance on who is a fit and proper person to be the owner of an English Premier League team. And they failed. They failed by just turning a blind eye. I mean, did they think that he was some plucky boy who managed to pull himself up by his bootstraps to become a billionaire in the Russian mafia state? No, that doesn't happen. He never should have been allowed to have had that position in the first place, and then to use that position in the way that he did.
Right. This
to
is exactly
infiltrate British high life and society and politics.
Yes, Mr. Nyland. I mean, I'm with you. I agree. And first of all, these are two absolutely different legal fields, and both are not working.
Both are not working. Both are not working.
Well, that
that was my
question.
If we go back to the central bank assets, the question that I always ask there is this, right? So, well, there are two main points. Number one is that people argue about precedent. And I'm talking about people who are legal scholars in the West, and everything here is rule of law, and we have to do this correctly, right? And so they talk about precedent, the precedent of taking these assets. The precedent that we should be looking at, in actual fact, is the unprovoked and illegal invasion and genocidal intent that are this war, Russia's war against Ukraine. That is the precedent that has been broken. And so breaking other precedents to follow that, it's in line. But the second question that you have to ask about formerly Russia's $300 billion in central bank assets, under what circumstances do we see them ever being given back to Russia?
Absolutely. I mean,
when the estimated reconstruction bill for Ukraine is $750 billion, double the amount of Russian frozen assets, when we're not talking about reconstruction, when we're going into reparations in the future, when we're going to other forms of justice as well, there is no scenario where the world can ever agree to hand this $300 billion back to the Putin regime.
Well, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, I agree, but I'm not so sure. I'm just afraid this is there is a scenario, though, it can allow this terrible thing happening, actually. Just give this money to Russians because this is a private property, or not private property of Russia and blah, 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 and so on. I can imagine this happening. Maybe not. I hope I'm wrong. But it's just let's discuss Trump, all right? Because this is another topic about the Russian assets. What I meant, the Russian assets are still there. We're using it, but both legal fields are not working, and I don't know why. Because maybe we as a collective West are just not too decisive to
the mechanisms that have been worked out so far is how to use the interest that is being accumulated on those assets. And in fact, I met somebody in Berlin last year. I was at a conference in July in Berlin last year, and he was working on doing the exact same thing with Abramovich's frozen assets. Okay, if we can't get the capital, at least can we have access to the interest to be putting that to good use to at least have that money working. So we're getting the interest off the frozen
That
capital
much.
amount,
Yeah,
but
that much is true.
but the
Right.
capital sum
Right.
should be released.
Yeah, well, interest rate, yeah, I know that. And this is somewhat a relief indeed. Let us return, or I don't know, let's get back to Trump because Trump is back. Trump suspends US aid. Well, for Ukraine, not military help. Yeah, that much we know. What is it actually, what has been suspended and what does it mean for Ukraine?
I was actually a little bit confused about this myself, and I was asked about this by one of my colleagues last night, and she said, "Does this Trump ban affect us?" And I replied back, and I said, "No, of course it doesn't. It won't affect any ongoing projects. It's about approval of new projects, and no, it doesn't affect us in any case." And then I read up more and realized, in actual fact, it's not a stop on approval of new projects. It is a stop work order. Meaning that ongoing projects, I'm not sure to what extent they've been funded already, to a degree they have to stop work. And it's not just how it's affecting Ukraine. What Trump has done is affecting operations globally, where the United States is supporting refugees, feeding starving people, providing relief to people who've been struck by disasters and famines and disease. I mean, that is what is being stopped. Here in Ukraine, the one example that I've seen that really struck me is that Veteran Hub, which is an excellent organization.
Right,
I've
I've
worked
seen that.
alongside Veteran Hub. I was in many meetings with them in the early days of Lifeline Ukraine. I know the phenomenal work that they do, and they've opened satellite offices around the country to support veterans in their home cities. And it looks like that this immediate Trump stop work order means that Veteran Hub, their office in Vinnytsia, is having to close immediately. And so there are veterans who rely on this phenomenal organization with years of a great track record of working with American donors and reporting to them and satisfying them on all of their reporting requirements. And they've jumped through all of the hoops. And now they're having to restrict the services that they can provide. And it's not just Ukraine. This is going on globally.
Right.
It's another sign of the awfulness that is within this Trump administration. I'm afraid, and we can cherry pick out certain things that might look to potentially be positive here or there about certain statements or certain ideas coming forward. The military aid is not being stopped yet, but it's just what is happening, and not just to Ukraine, the United States' operations overseas. What is happening in those countries? What is happening to the United States' reputation overseas as well? It's all very terrible, and I'm sorry, but we're just 1 week into the Trump administration, and it's 4 years of it, and it is what it is. Маємо те, що маємо. We have what we have.
We have what we have. It is what it is. Маємо, що маємо. Thank you so very much for your emotion. It is a great pleasure to talk to you. We're going to do it again, surely. Promise me that.
It's always good to talk to you as well, and I look forward to our next conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paul. We talk. Goodbye. Cheers. Well, that will be all for tonight. Thank you so very much for your precious time with us. My name is Henry Keane, and we are UATV English, an English-speaking Ukrainian state media in a constant persuasion to do the good job to deliver the hard truth in easy terms for you. Please don't shy out to comment and like. Your voice matters indeed. Until that, stay safe and tune for more. All ready tomorrow.